One team, two seats, three drivers. That's the problem that the AlphaTauri team face going into 2024. Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, and Liam Lawson have all shown that they have what it takes to be a Formula One driver, but only two can stay. I just find it so weird how Liam Lawson was shunned by the Red Bull and AlphaTauri teams for so long. We had links to Colton Herta, then Nick De Vries came in, and then Daniel Ricciardo after that, but he's finally got his shot. He's carried himself better than anyone could have predicted, and it puts the team in a really awkward situation going into 2024. If they really love Daniel Ricciardo as much as it seems, what happens to Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson moving forward? There are positives and negatives for the both of them, which makes it an almost impossible decision. Who would have known that Alex Albon being dropped by Red Bull, moving to Williams and having appendicitis would actually put his ex-team in a really sticky situation going into 2024, but that's just the mad world of the Formula One driver market that we find ourselves in. In 2022, when Albon missed the Italian Grand Prix with appendicitis, Nick De Vries came in, scored points in a Williams, looked absolutely phenomenal, and became the hottest prospect on the Formula One grid all of a sudden. He was linked to Alpine, Williams, but managed to settle into a seat at AlphaTauri, where he just didn't quite hit the standard that was expected from a Formula 2 and Formula E champion. I mean, he did put a target on his back saying that he didn't want to be classified as a rookie. He never really had the pace. He crashed constantly. He was improving, but not at a rate that we really expected. And I don't think he was ever going to get to the level that AlphaTauri really wanted him to be. AlphaTauri weren't pleased, and then they decided to drop him after 10 Grand Prix for Daniel Ricciardo. I think like everybody else, I was really excited to see Daniel Ricciardo back on the Formula One grid. Okay, it took him a couple of races to get back into the swing of things, but after the summer break, he had that time to reset, and I was really excited to see what he could do going into the second half of the year. But the first race back in Zandvoort, he hits the wall. It's a really innocuous crash considering the heavy impacts that we see in Formula One nowadays. And he injures his hand, has to go for surgery, and is out for a few races. So AlphaTauri have gone through two drivers and need a third partner for Yuki Tsunoda this year. In steps Liam Lawson. I would say that expectations were fairly low. Many of the people I was talking to said that a good race weekend for Liam Lawson would just be finishing the Grand Prix, even if it was 10 or 20 seconds behind everybody else, and just having a clean race weekend. But actually, in the three Grand Prix we've seen, he's had three clean race weekends, whilst also being very competitive in that AlphaTauri car. I think he's shown that he could make that step up into Formula One. He even picked up 2 points in Singapore, finishing in 9th place, which is the best finish of any AlphaTauri driver so far this season, and there's been 4 of them. So Liam, Yuki, and Daniel are all showing promise. How on earth do AlphaTauri make 3 drivers fit into 2 seats? Well, let's look at the positives and negatives for each driver and decide who AlphaTauri should go for going into 2024. Let's start with Yuki Tsunoda because he has been in the seat for the longest, 3 years so far at AlphaTauri, and although it started slow back in 2021, I feel like he has really stepped up this season. At the start of the season in particular, he looked really quick. Okay, he struggled with some of the wetter races just before the summer break, although I feel like that wasn't too much his fault and more the fact that the AlphaTauri just didn't upgrade in the same way that like Williams and McLaren did, for instance. But Yuki Tsunoda kept finishing 10th and 11th, and then since the summer break, he hasn't really had a shot because in the 3 races we've seen Lawson, we haven't actually seen Yuki because he's been taken out through no fault of his own. But I would say he has taken up this role of the team number 1 really well this year. I think the 3 10th place finishes towards the beginning of the season showed a lot of promise. There was even talk about him possibly replacing Sergio Perez in the long term at the Red Bull team. My worry is that Yuki Tsunoda's connection with Honda was the main thing that got him into a Red Bull seat in the first place, but Honda are no longer partnered with Red Bull in that same way. So I feel like when the Red Bull bosses do look at him in that AlphaTauri car, first and foremost, he isn't Max Verstappen. He's not going to go on to be the next Max Verstappen either. And he is still young. He's 22 and he is improving and has improved over the 3 years that we've seen him so far. But I don't think he's ever going to hit the echelons of a top driver. And again, it's like, what do Red Bull really want from Yuki Tsunoda? Is he going to be able to go into that second Red Bull seat eventually and maybe play second fiddle to Max Verstappen? Is he going to be good enough to win them Constructors' Championships if Ferrari and Mercedes are more competitive? Especially with Aston Martin and McLaren knocking on the door now too. And then also Yuki Tsunoda, as I said, that Honda link doesn't really have as much backing anymore because Honda are now moving to Aston Martin with their program, which means that huge financial draw that Yuki also had isn't there for him either. which I would actually argue is Daniel Ricciardo's biggest asset to the team. Daniel Ricciardo has been around the Formula One grid for a very long time and has one of the biggest fan bases in the entire sport because he's got one of the biggest personalities as well. He is a huge financial draw, not necessarily through sponsorships, but just through the fan base that he has and through the draw that he could bring to a brand new team moving forward. And it's clear that some of his biggest fans are the Red Bull team. They just absolutely love him. Obviously, he was there in the past, and they were so happy to bring him back into the Red Bull setup once he left McLaren. They jumped him into that AlphaTauri seat as quickly as they possibly could. Obviously, they'd have seen something on the simulator and that Silverstone practice where they were like, we have to get him into the car. He's had excellent times with the team, and I feel like they're kind of drawing on that past as well. Clearly, the goal is getting him back into that team if possible and replacing Sergio Perez. I don't think that'll happen in 2024 though. So if Daniel Ricciardo is going to go into the Red Bull setup in 2025, they kind of need to keep hold of him. But his racing stock has dropped a little since he was there before. The Renault gamble didn't pay off, and then he couldn't adapt to the McLaren car, and that forced him out of the team early. So he's definitely not the Daniel Ricciardo that we saw last time he was in a Red Bull car. Will he be able to go back into a Red Bull and thrive? Will he be battling with Max Verstappen? I'm hesitant to say that he'll get back to his absolute best, but Red Bull clearly see his potential, and they clearly have an idea for Daniel Ricciardo moving forward because he's the fourth oldest driver on the grid, and therefore putting him in the secondary team even this year doesn't make too much sense. Which is where Liam Lawson, on the other hand, although a complete unknown in Formula One terms, apart from these 3 races, has youth on his side. He's only 21 years old. He's done everything that he possibly can to try and get in the good books with Red Bull. I mean, he won the Toyota Racing Series, which is actually how he got the Red Bull contract in the first place. Then he was 5th in Formula 3, 9th and 3rd in Formula 2. Should have won DTM, but got taken out of the last Grand Prix. And then he was 2nd so far in the Super Formula season so far with 1 race left to go. So he's certainly been trying to prove himself to the Red Bull setup. And although they've shunned him quite a few times, he's stuck around, he waited for his opportunity, and he's grabbed it with both hands. Since coming in, 2 of his 3 races have probably been 2 of the trickier races of the season so far. Zandvoort had changing weather conditions what felt like every lap in a car that he hadn't driven during Friday practice and only had 1 practice session to get into. And then Singapore is one of the longest, hottest and most demanding tracks on the calendar, and he managed to pick himself up 2 points there, where Yuki has only managed to pick up 3 points all season. Daniel Ricciardo didn't pick up points in his couple of races in the car, and Nick de Vries also didn't pick up any points across 10 races in that AlphaTauri car. So another comparison that we have to make is obviously between Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson in qualifying. I think a lot of people are going towards that. Yuki hasn't taken part in 2 of the 3 races, so we have to go back to qualifying. Yuki won in the Netherlands, but as I said, Liam only had that first free practice session before he jumped into the car in horrible racing conditions. He basically matched him in Monza. They came in 11th and 12th place respectively. And then Liam Lawson beat him in Singapore, although I did look into the numbers and Yuki's Q1 time was quicker than any lap Liam put together. So Yuki Tsunoda probably would have outqualified Liam Lawson had the weekend gone slightly differently for him, especially because I feel like in the race, he would have been able to make up positions. We saw Liam Lawson move forwards. We would have probably seen Yuki Tsunoda move forwards as well, had he not been taken out by Sergio Perez. So it's very difficult to compare those 2 right now, just off of those 3 races. But Liam Lawson has looked like he's closing the gap on Yuki Tsunoda and has shown enough promise right now to really look forward to 2024 and try and get himself a seat. So what do Red Bull actually want from their second team? Do they want a team that is actually developing youth for the future? Do they want a team that is actually developing young drivers that can go into the main Red Bull team? I don't think so, because they've got Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen is still very young. He's going to be a 3-time world champion. Do they want that team to be competitive? Do they want AlphaTauri to, try and make their way up the rankings? I also don't think so. I think they want them to be like a midfield team at best. I think if AlphaTauri finished 5th or 6th in the constructor standings, Red Bull would be like, that's enough. You don't want to go any higher than that, because they don't actually want competition for their main Red Bull team. I think they just want another huge brand to build off of and basically a moving billboard. That's why we saw them move to AlphaTauri in the first place, because they wanted a big billboard for this fashion company that they just started. Which is why my verdict, unfortunately for the younger drivers in the Red Bull setup, it's no longer really a team where they want to bring through youth, and I think they'll want to desperately get in Daniel Ricciardo for the 2024 season, especially with the team rebranding. I just think Daniel Ricciardo, that name that he has with the team rebrand, will be such a big thing to build off of for them. I think it's similar to what we saw when Sebastian Vettel went to Aston Martin. They had that World Championship name to build off of. Okay, Daniel Ricciardo's not a world champion, but he is a huge name up and down the Formula One grid. And then it comes the Yuki versus Lawson question, and I honestly could see this going either way. Lawson, I think, is the more exciting prospect right now, just because he's only been in the Car 3 races, he's shiny, he's new, and he looks really competitive. But I personally think they should keep Yuki Tsunoda in that seat. I mean, you can't go from Yuki Tsunoda might replace Sergio Perez in 2024 to Yuki Tsunoda is now out of a seat for 2024. Maybe they can get Liam Lawson into the Williams seat. Obviously, Alex Albon is at Williams now. Red Bull managed to get him in there. Maybe Red Bull have got enough draw where they can replace Logan Sargent with Liam Lawson. I think that will be tricky, although if they do decide to go for Liam Lawson over Yuki Tsunoda in that second AlphaTauri seat, I can also see it happening. Like Albon's appendicitis, Nick de Vries not being good enough, and Daniel Ricciardo's injury might just be the perfect storm that gets Liam Lawson into Formula One, which is a crazy cycle for it to go through. But I'd love to know, 3 drivers, they all have merits, they all have downsides. Who would you choose? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you've enjoyed this video, I also put together a video predicting the Japanese Grand Prix. So click that link and I'll see you over there.